She was just an invisible girl in a hospital full of hustle and loneliness, but her daily cookies touched the heart of an old man who everyone else had forgotten. And in the end, she found out she'd saved someone who had once saved her own family. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Here's what happened. Every day when the school bell rang at 3 in the afternoon, Lily packed her notebooks into her faded pink backpack and walked to the gate where her mother, Elena, was waiting. There was no rush in either of their steps. The 10-year-old girl knew their destination would always be the same, St. Vincent's Hospital, where her mother had worked as a custodian since Lily was 5. The hospital was just 3 blocks from Astoria Elementary School in the Queensborough of New York City. It was a route Lily knew by heart. They'd pass Mr. Rossi's deli and he'd always wave when he saw them, the pharmacy where Mrs. Chen worked the counter, and the small park where a few kids always played on the rusty slide. Elena always walked with her shoulders slightly slumped, as if carrying an invisible weight. At 32, her hands were calloused from scrubbing floors and washing windows. Her dark hair was always tied in a simple bun, and she wore the same navy blue scrubs every day. Lily watched her mother in silence during their walk. There was something in Elena's eyes that the girl couldn't quite decipher, a mix of exhaustion and determination. That meant she never complained, even when the work was hard. St. Vincent's wasn't the biggest hospital in the area, but it served a large part of the local community. It had 3 floors, long corridors that seemed to stretch on forever, and that distinct smell of disinfectant that Lily had learned to associate with her mother's workplace. When they arrived, Eleanor would greet the other staff at the reception desk, always polite, always discreet. Lily would stand by her side, quiet, watching the flow of doctors, nurses, and visitors constantly coming and going. The housekeeping supervisor, Ms. Thompson, was a tall, stern woman who always spoke in a low voice, but in a way that everyone heard perfectly. She would assign the day's tasks to each staff member, check the cleaning supplies, and explain which floors needed special attention. Elena listened to everything carefully, asked questions when necessary, and then headed to the supply closet to get the products and equipment she would need. It was at this moment that Lily's secret routine began. The supply closet was at the end of a less trafficked hallway on the first floor. It was a small room, with shelves full of detergents, disinfectants, mops, sponges, trash bags, and other materials. At the back of the room was a metal cabinet where backup supplies were stored, and it was there, between gallons of industrial soap and packages of toilet paper, that Lily had found her hiding spot. The first time she hid there was by accident. Eleanor was talking to Ms. Thompson about a problem with one of the vacuum cleaners, and the conversation went on longer than usual. Lily was bored, waiting in the hallway, when she noticed the supply closet door was ajar. Driven by the natural curiosity of a 10-year-old, she went in to explore. The cabinet in the back caught her eye because it was partially empty. There was just enough space for her to sit comfortably between the boxes. When Eleanor finished her conversation and came looking for her daughter, Lily was hidden in the cabinet, watching the hallway through the crack in the door. Eleanor found her quickly but didn't scold her harshly. She just asked her not to touch anything and to stay quiet. From that day on, the supply closet cabinet became Lily's private world during her afternoons at the hospital. Elena never fully explained why she brought her daughter to work every day. Lily knew that other mothers left their kids with neighbors, relatives, or in after-school programs, but Elena preferred to keep Lily close. Maybe it was the protective instinct of a mother raising her daughter alone. Maybe it was the natural distrust of someone who grew up in neighborhoods where it wasn't always safe to leave children unsupervised. Or maybe it was simply that Elena enjoyed her daughter's quiet company, even from a distance. From her hiding spot in the cabinet, Lily listened to the sounds of the hospital, hurried footsteps in the hall, conversations between nurses, the rattle of gurneys being pushed, phones ringing at the front desk. She had learned to distinguish the different types of footsteps, the soft, quick shoes of the nurses, the heavy boots of the security guards, the silent sneakers of the younger doctors, the shuffling slippers of some elderly patients. Elena would stop by the supply closet several times during the afternoon, always checking to see if her daughter was okay. She brought small snacks in her purse, Nilla wafers, an apple, sometimes a juice box. Lily ate in silence, always grateful for her mother's care. During these moments, they would whisper about school, about homework, about plans for the weekend. It was a world built on small rituals and comfortable silences. Lily had grown accustomed to the routine. She did her homework using a small booklight Elena had bought specifically for that purpose. She read books from the school library. She drew in old notebooks her mother got from the hospital. Sometimes she just watched and thought about the things she saw and heard. Over time, Lily began to recognize familiar voices. Jessica, the nurse who always talked loudly and laughed a lot. Dr. Miller, who greeted everyone by name. Sarah, the physical therapist, who told jokes to cheer up the patients. And there were also the voices she learned to avoid, some of the grumpier staff, agitated visitors, people who spoke rudely to others. Elena was respected by everyone at the hospital. She worked efficiently, never got involved in gossip, helped her colleagues when needed, and treated everyone with courtesy. Lily felt proud of her mother when she overheard other employees commenting on the quality of Elena's work. "That woman is gold," she heard a nurse say once. "She never misses a thing, and she's still super polite to everyone." But there was something that bothered Lily about this seemingly perfect routine. She noticed that her mother was almost invisible to many people. Doctors would walk past Elena without a word of greeting. Some visitors treated the housekeeping staff as if they were furniture. Patients' families would sometimes speak rudely when they wanted something cleaned more quickly. Elena never complained. She absorbed it all with the patience of someone who had learned that some battles aren't worth fighting. But Lily saw, and she kept it all in her heart, with the silent indignation of a girl who loved her mother and couldn't understand why some people couldn't see how special she was. It was on a particularly hot afternoon in March that Lily's curiosity got the better of her. Elena was on the third floor, cleaning the windows in the private patient wing. Lily had finished her homework and was restless in her hiding spot. The hallway was quieter than usual, with fewer people moving about. She slipped out of the cabinet and walked to the door of the supply closet. She looked both ways down the hall and saw no one. The temptation to explore the hospital a little, to see things other than what she observed through the crack in the cabinet door, was irresistible. Lily left the supply closet and walked down the hallway, her heart pounding. She knew she was disobeying her mother's instructions, but the feeling of freedom was thrilling. She walked slowly, looking at the pictures on the walls, the floor signs, the plants in pots near the windows. She took the stairs to the second floor, avoiding the elevator where she might run into someone she knew. The second floor was different from the first, quieter, with wider hallways and a more solemn atmosphere. Lily explored, always listening for the sound of footsteps that might signal someone's approach. It was when she passed the partially open door of room 214 that her life took a completely different turn. Through the crack in the door, she saw an elderly man lying in bed, staring blankly at the ceiling. He had messy white hair, a stubbly beard, and the bluest eyes Lily had ever seen. There was something in his expression that caught the girl's attention. It wasn't exactly sadness. It was as if he were far away, lost in thoughts no one else could reach. Lily stopped at the door and watched for a few seconds. The old man noticed her presence and turned his head toward her. When their eyes met, his face scrunched into an expression of irritation. "What are you doing there?" he asked in a hoarse, impatient voice. "Get out of here, kid. This is no place for children." Lily was startled by his rude tone, but she didn't run away as any other child might have. There was something in the old man's voice that didn't match his harsh words. It was as if he were playing a part he didn't really want to play. She remained at the door, watching him in silence. "Are you deaf?" he asked, raising his voice slightly. "I said get out of here." Just then, Lily heard the footsteps of Jessica, the nurse, approaching down the hall. Without a second thought, she quickly moved away from the door of room 214 and hurried back down to the first floor, to her hiding spot in the supply closet. Her heart was racing, not just from the fear of almost being caught, but from something deeper she couldn't explain. That evening, as Elena and Lily rode the bus home, the girl was quieter than usual. She thought about the old man in room 214, about the way he had spoken to her, but mostly about the expression she had seen in his blue eyes. It was the same expression she sometimes noticed on her own mother's face when she thought no one was looking. a mixture of weariness and loneliness that words couldn't describe. Elena noticed her daughter's silence on the way home but didn't press her to talk. It was one of the things Lily admired most about her mother. She always respected moments of silence, as if she understood that sometimes people need to process their own emotions before sharing them. When they arrived at their small two-room apartment, Eleanor prepared dinner while Lily organized her school supplies for the next day. It was a simple, comforting routine. They ate dinner watching the news on the small TV in the living room, and afterward, Eleanor helped Lily with some tricky math problems. But the whole time, the image of the old man from room 214 wouldn't leave Lily's mind. She wondered who he was, why he was alone in the hospital, why he seemed so angry at everything and everyone. And most of all, she wondered if anyone ever visited that man, if anyone worried about him the way she worried about her mother. Before going to sleep, Lily made a decision that would change not only her own life but also the life of the grumpy old man in room 214. She had seen something in those blue eyes that most people couldn't see, and the next day she would go back to find out what it was. The next day, Lily carried something special in her backpack. Eleanor always packed a lunch for her daughter to take to school, a sandwich, a piece of fruit, and an oatmeal raisin cookie she baked herself on weekends. It was a simple recipe she had learned from her own mother, and one that Lily had loved since she was little. That afternoon, when they arrived at the hospital, Lily had a plan. She waited for Elena to go up to the third floor to clean the patient rooms, and then she slipped out of her hiding spot, her heart pounding. She carefully tucked the cookie into her sweatshirt pocket and walked with determination toward the second floor. The hallway was busier than the day before. Lily had to hide twice, first behind a medicine cart when she saw Jessica the nurse approaching, and then in a corner near the water fountain when Dr. Miller walked by, talking on his phone. But she managed to reach the door of room 214 without being seen. This time, the door was completely closed. Lily hesitated for a moment. Maybe the old man was sleeping. Maybe he really didn't want to be bothered by a curious child, but something was stronger than her fear. An intuition that this man needed company, even if he didn't know it himself. She knocked lightly on the door and pushed it open slowly. The old man was in the same position as the day before, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. When he noticed the girl's presence, he turned his head with an even more irritated expression. "You again?" he grumbled. "Didn't I tell you to get lost yesterday?" Lily didn't answer. Instead, she took the cookie out of her pocket and placed it carefully on the bedside table. The old man watched the gesture in silence, a flicker of surprise in his eyes that he quickly tried to hide. "What's this?" he asked, trying to maintain his rude tone. "An oatmeal raisin cookie," Lily replied in a quiet but clear voice. "My mom made it." "I didn't ask for any cookie," he said, but his eyes remained fixed on the small treat Lily had left on the table. "I know," she answered, "but I thought you might be hungry." The old man was silent for a few seconds, as if processing the situation. No one had offered him anything out of pure kindness in a very long time. The nurses brought him medicine and food because it was their job. The doctors asked questions because they needed answers. But a strange child had come up an entire floor just to give him a homemade cookie. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice slightly softer. "Lily," she replied. "And yours?" "Henry," he said after a pause. "But everyone calls me Hank." "Why Hank?" Lily asked, genuinely curious. "It's a long story," he replied, and for the first time he managed something that could almost be called a half-smile. "And you, what are you doing here at the hospital? Shouldn't you be in school?" "School's out," Lily explained. "My mom works here. She's on the housekeeping staff." Hank nodded slowly. He had noticed the woman who always worked so efficiently and politely. Now he understood where the girl had inherited her natural kindness. "And you just wander around by yourself while your mum works?" he asked. "I stay in the supply closet," Lily answered honestly. "Downstairs. But sometimes I come up to see different things." Hank observed the girl more closely. There was something in her posture, in the way she spoke, that reminded him of something. It was a distant memory, one he couldn't quite access, but it stirred feelings that had been dormant for a long time. "You're not afraid of me?" he asked. "Everyone else here is. They say I'm a grumpy, rude old man." Lily thought for a moment before answering. "You are rude," she said with a sincerity that caught him off guard. "But I don't think you're mean. Just very sad." Lily's words hit Hank like a punch to the gut. It was the first time in years that someone had managed to see past the shell of irritation he had built around himself. He fell silent, not knowing how to respond. "Why are you sad?" Lily asked with the naturalness of a child who doesn't understand that there are questions adults prefer not to answer. "I'm not sad," Hank replied quickly. "I'm just tired." "Tired of what?" "Of everything," he said, and there was a brutal honesty in that simple answer. Lily nodded as if she understood perfectly. She had seen that kind of tiredness on her mother's face on some difficult nights, when the bills were piling up and the problems seemed bigger than the solutions. They sat in silence for a few minutes. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, but the kind that arises between people who recognize something in each other. Finally, Lily stood up from the chair where she had been sitting. "I have to go back," she said. "My mom will be looking for me." "Go on then," Hank said, trying to revert to his rude tone. But he couldn't quite manage it. When Lily reached the door, she turned back one last time. "Are you going to eat the cookie?" she asked. "Maybe," he replied. "I'll bring another one tomorrow," she said, and left before he could protest. Hank stared at the closed door for a long time. Then his trembling hands reached for the cookie on the bedside table. He smelled it first. It had a homemade aroma he hadn't smelled in decades. He took a small bite. It was a little dry, as all homemade cookies get after a few hours, but it had an honest flavor, without preservatives or too much sugar. He ate the entire cookie slowly, savoring every piece, and for the first time in a very long time, he felt something he had forgotten existed, the feeling that someone cared. The next day, Lily returned. This time she brought 2 cookies, 1 oatmeal raisin and 1 coconut macaroon. Hank grumbled that she was wasting her time, that he hadn't asked for anything, that homemade cookies were too sweet for his taste, but he ate them both. On the 3rd day she brought chocolate chip cookies. Hank complained that chocolate gave him heartburn, that the cookies were too small, that the dough was dry, but he ate every last one, and so began a ritual that neither of them had planned, but that both began to look forward to. Every day at 3:30 in the afternoon, Lily would sneak out of the supply closet and go up to room 214 with a different cookie. And every day, Hank would have a new complaint, but he never left a crumb on the plate. As the days went by, their conversations grew longer. Hank would ask about school, about Lily's favorite subjects, about her teachers. She told him about math class, which was her favorite, about her teacher, Mrs. Gable, who always praised her handwriting, and about recess when she preferred to read in the library rather than play in the yard with the other kids. Lily asked questions too. She found out that Hank was born in Buffalo, New York, that he loved baseball even though he'd never seen a game live, that he hated the color green because it reminded him of military uniforms, and that he hated being called by his full name because it sounded too formal. "Why don't you like green?" she asked one April afternoon as she watched Hank methodically chew a sesame cookie. "It's a color that brings back bad memories," he answered evasively. "What kind of memories?" Hank hesitated. It was a simple question from a child, but it touched on wounds he had spent decades trying to forget. "Ever hear of the Vietnam War?" he asked. Lily shook her head. "It was a war that happened a long time ago," Hank explained. "Long before you were born. Long before your mother was born, too." "Did you fight in that war?" Lily asked, impressed. "No," Hank smiled. "I'm not that old. But my grandfather did, and he told me stories. It was a half-truth. The story was more complicated, more painful, and involved a different war in a distant country. But Lily didn't need to know that now. Maybe she never would. "Were they sad stories?" she asked. "Very sad," Hank confirmed. "War is always sad, Lily, even when it's necessary." She nodded with the seriousness of a child trying to understand adult concepts that were still too big for her. "Is that why you're all alone here?" she asked. "Because of the sad stories?" Lily's question was like a sharp blade cutting straight to the heart of the matter. Hank stared at her in silence for a long moment. There was something about this girl that completely disarmed him, that could see through all his defenses and ask questions that went straight to the point. "It's not quite like that," he finally answered. "It's more complicated." "Adults always say things are complicated when they don't want to explain," Lily observed, with a wisdom that surprised Hank. "You're right," he admitted, "but some things really are too complicated to explain to a 10-year-old girl." "I understand more than adults think," she said. Hank believed her. There was something in the way Lily observed the world, how she asked her questions and processed the answers, that indicated a precocious maturity, probably the result of growing up in a family where resources were scarce and responsibilities were shared early. "Do you have a family?" Lily asked. The question caught Hank off guard. For a few seconds he considered lying, making up a story about children who lived far away, about grandchildren who would be visiting soon. But there was something in Lily's direct gaze that made lying impossible. "I have a son," he admitted, "but we haven't spoken in a long time." "Why?" "Because he thinks I'm a grumpy, rude old man," Hank answered with a bitter smile. "You are," Lily said without hesitation, "but that doesn't mean he can't talk to you." Lily's simple logic was both comforting and painful. Hank knew the situation with his son was infinitely more complicated than that, but there was something beautiful in the way she saw human relationships. Direct, honest, without the layers of resentment and pride that adults accumulate over the years. It was on a Thursday afternoon that the first truly special moment happened between them. Hank was trying to reach for a coconut macaroon that Lily had left on the table, but his hands were shaking more than usual that day. The cookie slipped from his fingers and fell into his lap. Instinctively, Lily got up from her chair and picked up the cookie. Without a second thought, she offered it directly to Hank's mouth. It was a natural gesture, the kind a granddaughter would make for a beloved grandfather, without any awkwardness or ceremony. Hank froze for a moment. It had been decades since anyone had cared for him that way. His hands trembled not just from age, but from the emotion that simple gesture stirred in him. He opened his mouth and accepted the cookie. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "You're welcome, Mr. Hank," Lily replied naturally, as if feeding a trembling old man was the most normal thing in the world. That night, after Lily had gone, Hank opened the drawer of his bedside table and took out something he hadn't looked at in months, a heavy bronze medal with engraved symbols that told a story few knew. He held it in his trembling hands and thought of the girl who came up a floor every day to bring him homemade cookies. There was something about her that reminded him of someone, the eyes, the quiet way of observing, the natural kindness that asked for nothing in return. It was a distant memory, from a time he had tried to forget, but that now returned with frightening clarity. The next day, when Lily arrived with a banana cookie, Hank was holding the medal. "What's that?" she asked, curious as always. "A payment for the cookies," he said, offering the medal to her. Lily took the heavy object and examined it carefully. There were strange symbols engraved on the bronze, and a simple but strong chain. "It's very beautiful," she said, "but I need payment. I bring the cookies because I want to." "I know," Hank replied, "but I want you to have it anyway." Lily put the medal in her sweatshirt pocket, unaware that this piece of metal held a story that would change her life forever. On a Friday morning in May, Lily arrived at the hospital with a chocolate chip cookie she had helped Elena make the night before. It was Hank's favorite kind, though he always complained that chocolate was too sweet for someone his age. She climbed the stairs with a light heart, thinking about the stories he would tell her that day. But when she reached the second-floor hallway, something was different. There was an unusual amount of activity near room 214. 2 nurses were talking in low voices, and a custodian Lily didn't recognize was pushing a supply cart in the opposite direction he normally went. As she approached the room, Lily saw that the door was wide open. This was strange. Hank always kept the door just ajar, enough for her to slip in, but never wide open. She hesitated in the hallway, the cookie still wrapped in her hand, and tried to listen to the voices coming from the room. It was the voice of the head nurse, Mrs. Davis, a serious and efficient woman Lily knew by sight. She was speaking to someone Lily couldn't see, but whose voice was firm and impatient. "Sir, you have to understand that we need to follow protocol," Mrs. Davis was saying. "We can't just hand over personal belongings without the proper documentation." "I'm his son," an irritated male voice replied. "His only son, his only heir. Who else would have a right to his things?" Lily felt her stomach drop. She moved closer to the door, trying to understand what was happening. That's when she saw that the bed in room 214 was empty, the sheets folded impeccably. There was no sign that anyone had recently occupied the room. "Where's Mr. Hank?" she asked aloud, before she could stop herself. The two people in the room turned to look at her. Mrs. Davis had an expression of surprise and compassion. The man beside her was tall, wore a well-tailored grey suit, and had the same blue eyes as Hank, but without the warmth Lily had learned to recognize in the old man's gaze. "Honey," Mrs. Davis said in a gentle voice, "Mr. Peterson passed away during the night." "Passed away where?" Lily asked, though a part of her already knew the answer. "He died, kid," the man in the suit answered impatiently. "Cardiac arrest in his sleep, very common at his age." The words hit Lily like a bucket of cold water. The cookie slipped from her hand and fell to the floor. She stood frozen in the doorway, trying to process information that seemed impossible to be true. "But I brought his cookie," she murmured, as if that could somehow reverse the situation. Mrs. Davis approached Lily carefully. "Are you the little girl who visited Mr. Peterson every day?" she asked gently. Lily nodded, still in a state of shock. "He talked about you," Mrs. Davis said. "He called you the cookie girl. He said you were the most important part of his day." The man in the suit watched the conversation with growing interest. "What girl is this?" he asked. "My father hasn't had any visitors in years." "This young lady came here every day," Mrs. Davis explained. "She brought your father homemade cookies. They would talk for hours." The man looked at Lily, with a mixture of surprise and suspicion. "Who are your parents?" he asked her directly. "My mom is Elena," Lily answered in a weak voice. "She works in housekeeping here at the hospital." "The janitor?" the man asked, and there was something in his tone that Lily didn't like. "A custodian," she corrected him with dignity. "My mom isn't just a janitor. She takes care of the whole hospital." The man exchanged a meaningful look with Mrs. Davis. "I need to speak with this girl's mother," he said. "There are some legal matters that need to be cleared up." That moment, Elena appeared in the hallway. She had noticed Lily wasn't in the supply closet and had come up to look for her. When she saw her daughter standing in the doorway of room 214 with a shocked expression, she rushed toward her. "Lily, what happened?" she asked, hugging her daughter. "Mr. Hank died, Mom," Lily said, and finally the tears began to fall. Elena looked into the room and quickly understood the situation. She knew her daughter's routine better than anyone imagined, and was aware of the special friendship that had developed between Lily and the old man in room 214. "I'm so sorry, sweetie," she murmured, holding her daughter close. The man in the suit introduced himself. "I'm Richard Peterson," he said. "The deceased's son. Are you Elena?" "Yes, sir," Elena answered politely. "I need to speak with you about some matters related to my father's will," Richard said. "It seems he mentioned you and your daughter in legal documents." Elena was visibly confused. "I don't understand, sir. I just worked here. I barely knew your father." "But your daughter knew him," Richard said, looking at Lily with an expression that wasn't exactly friendly. "And apparently he knew her too." Mrs. Davis interrupted the conversation. "Perhaps it would be best to discuss this in my office," she suggested. "This isn't the appropriate place for legal matters." They went to the head nurse's office on the first floor. Lily was still in shock from the news, but she was beginning to realize that something more was happening beyond Hank's death. Richard seemed tense in a way that went beyond a son's natural grief. In the office, Mrs. Davis opened a thick file on her desk. "Mr. Peterson left very specific instructions," she began. "He knew his condition was delicate and had prepared all the necessary documentation in advance." "What kind of instructions?" Richard asked. Related to his will, Mrs. Davis replied. He left the majority of his estate to this woman and her daughter. The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor turned pale, clearly shocked by the information. Richard turned red with anger. "That's impossible," he said. "My father barely knew these people. How could he leave his inheritance to strangers?" "They weren't strangers to him," Mrs. Davis answered calmly. "Mr. Peterson documented his relationship with the family in detail. There are letters, notes, even recordings." Richard shot up from his chair abruptly. "This is clearly a case of undue influence," he said. "My father was frail, confused. These people took advantage of a vulnerable senior." "That's not true," Lily said, finding her voice for the first time since entering the office. "Mr. Hank wasn't confused. He was very smart. A 10-year-old girl is not qualified to assess the mental state of an elderly person," Richard retorted coldly. "But I am," Mrs. Davis interjected, "and I can attest that Mr. Peterson was in full command of his mental faculties. He underwent a psychological evaluation 3 months ago at his own request, precisely to ensure his decisions could not be contested." Richard was visibly frustrated. "I want to see all the documentation," he demanded. "Every paper, every signature. I will fight this in court, if necessary." "You have every right to do so," Mrs. Davis agreed, "but I can tell you that your father was very thorough. In addition to the formal will, there is a personal letter he wrote specifically in case of any challenges." She opened a locked drawer in her desk and took out a sealed envelope. This letter was hidden in his pillow, with instructions, to be opened only if someone questioned his testamentary decisions. Richard snatched the envelope from Mrs. Davis's hands and tore it open. His eyes scanned the contents of the letter in silence, and his expression gradually shifted from anger to confusion. "What does the letter say?" Eleanor asked timidly. Richard looked at her with a strange expression. "What is your full name?" he asked. "Eleanor Maria Smith," she replied. "And your mother's maiden name?" Eleanor was confused by the question, but answered, "Mary Ann Johnson." "And your grandfather's name?" "John Michael Smith," she said, growing more bewildered. "But why are you asking this?" Richard looked back at the letter, then at Lily. "And the girl's great-grandfather's name?" "John Michael Smith, too," Elena replied. "It was a family tradition to give the men the same name." Richard was silent for a long moment, rereading the letter. "My father writes here that he spent years searching for the family of a man who saved his life during the war," he said slowly. "A soldier named John Michael Smith." Eleanor felt her legs go weak. She sat down heavily in the chair. "That can't be a coincidence," she murmured. "In the letter, my father says he could never find the man's family because he died in his arms in combat," Richard continued. "But he always kept the soldiers' dog tags, hoping one day to return them to his family." Mrs. Davis opened another drawer and took out a small metal box. "Mr. Peterson gave me this to deliver along with the letter," she said. Inside the box was an old military dog tag, a few faded photographs, and a medal for bravery. Eleanor picked up the dog tag with trembling hands. "John M. Smith, Private First Class," she read aloud. "This was my grandfather's." Lily looked at the medal she had received from Hank days earlier, which was still in her pocket. Now she understood why it had seemed familiar. "Mr. Hank knew my great-grandfather?" she asked. "More than knew him," Richard said, still absorbing the information from the letter. "According to my father, your great-grandfather saved his life during a bombing raid. He carried my wounded father for miles to get medical help, but he was hit by shrapnel along the way and didn't make it." The room fell into absolute silence as everyone processed the magnitude of the revelation. "In the letter, my father says that with every day he spent with Lily, he became more certain he had found the family he'd been searching for decades," Richard continued. "Her mannerisms, her eyes, even the last name. It all fit." Eleanor was crying now, not just for Hank's death, but for the revelation that fate had brought their families together in such an unlikely way. "That's why he was so kind to Lily," she murmured. "Kind?" Richard asked, surprised. "My father wasn't known for being kind to anyone." "He was kind to me," Lily said firmly. "He grumbled a lot. But he always ate all the cookies, and he told me stories. Richard looked at the niece he had never known, and for the first time since arriving at the hospital, his expression softened slightly. "What else is in the letter?" Elena asked. Richard hesitated before continuing to read. "He says he left almost all of his assets to you because he finally found a way to repay the debt he owed to John Michael Smith's family," he said, "and because in the last months of his life, you were the only people who treated him like a human being, not like a problem or an obligation." The weight of those words fell upon everyone in the office. Richard, especially, seemed to be re-evaluating many things about the relationship he'd had with his father. "Does he mention anything else?" Mrs. Davis asked gently. "Yes," Richard said, his voice slightly choked. "He says that if I'm reading this letter, I'm probably trying to contest the will. And if that's the case, it's because he was right about the kind of son I've become." The words of his dead father hit Richard like a punch to the gut. He slowly folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. "There are more documents that need to be reviewed," Mrs. Davis said, breaking the silence. "Mr. Peterson left a detailed journal from the last 2 years, documenting every one of Lily's visits, every conversation they had. He wanted to be sure his motives couldn't be questioned." "Can I see the journal?" Lily asked. Mrs. Davis looked at Elena, who nodded. The journal was a hardcover notebook, its pages filled with Hank's shaky but legible handwriting. Lily flipped through a few pages and recognized the dates, the descriptions of the cookies she had brought, even some of the conversations they'd had. "March 15th, she read aloud. "The girl brought coconut macaroons today. I complained they were too sweet, but they were perfect. She reminds me so much of John. The same observant eyes, the same natural kindness. If she really is his descendant, fate has a very peculiar sense of humor." Lily kept flipping and found a more recent entry. "May 2nd, she read. "I'm sure of it now. The last name, the age, the physical traits. This girl is the great-granddaughter of the man who saved me. I've decided to leave everything to her and her mother. It's the only way I've found to honor John's memory and repay what he did for me." When Lily finished reading, there were tears in everyone's eyes in the office, including Richard's. "My father really did find the family he was looking for," he said quietly. "So now what?" Elena asked. "What happens with the will?" Richard looked at her and Lily for a long moment. "Now," he said, "I have to decide if I'm going to honor my father's last wishes, or if I'm going to become exactly the kind of son he thought I was." In the days following the meeting in Mrs. Davis's office, Eleanor and Lily's life changed completely. News of Hank's will had spread quickly through the hospital and then through the surrounding neighborhoods. Some people looked at them with admiration, others with suspicion, and many with poorly disguised curiosity. Richard hadn't given a definitive answer about his intentions, but his actions spoke louder than any words. 2 days after the meeting, a sharply dressed lawyer appeared at the hospital looking for Elena. He was Mr. Wallace, legal counsel for Richard Peterson, and he came with a proposal that sounded more like a veiled threat. Eleanor was cleaning the third-floor windows when the receptionist paged her. She hurried down, thinking there might be a problem with Lily, who was in her usual hiding spot in the supply closet. But she found the lawyer waiting in a private meeting room. Mr. Wallace was a middle-aged man with perfectly coiffed grey hair and a suit that cost more than Eleanor earned in 6 months. He greeted her with a cold cordiality and got straight to the point. "Mrs. Smith, I'm here representing the legitimate interests of Mr. Richard Peterson," he began. "I believe you understand the delicate situation we find ourselves in." Eleanor nodded but said nothing. She had learned over the years that silence was sometimes the best defense against people who used a lot of fancy words. "The will of the late Mr. Henry Peterson presents certain irregularities," the lawyer continued. "It is unusual for a person to leave their inheritance to individuals with whom they had no established family or business relationship." "But there was a relationship," Elena said quietly. "My daughter visited him every day." "Yes, and that is precisely what concerns us," Mr. Wallace replied. "A 10-year-old child visiting an elderly man daily without proper supervision. This could be interpreted as undue influence exerted through a minor, The lawyer's words were carefully chosen to sound technical and official, but Elena understood the underlying accusation perfectly. They were implying that she had used her daughter to manipulate a vulnerable old man. "Lily brought him cookies because she wanted to," Elena said, keeping her voice steady despite the nervousness she felt. "I didn't even know about their friendship at first." "Can you prove that?" the lawyer asked. The question caught Elena off guard. How could she prove she didn't know something? How could she prove her daughter's motives were pure? She remained silent, and Mr. Wallace took it as an advantage. "I'll be frank with you, Mrs. Smith," he said, his tone shifting slightly to something intended to be paternal. "My client is prepared to file a lawsuit contesting the will. He has the resources, the time, and the determination. A legal battle like this could drag on for years." Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. She knew what he was implying. People like her didn't have the resources to fight people like Richard Peterson in court for years. "However," the lawyer continued, "my client is a reasonable man. He is willing to offer a settlement that would be advantageous for both parties." "What kind of settlement?" Elena asked. $50,000, Mr. Wallace said. "Cash, tax-free. You renounce any claim to the inheritance, sign the necessary documents, and we avoid a lengthy and costly legal battle." $50,000 was more money than Elena had ever seen in her life. It was enough to pay off the mortgage on their small apartment, send Lily to a private school, and have an emergency fund that would provide stability for years. "I need to think about it," she said. "Naturally," the lawyer agreed, "but don't take too long. The offer may not stay on the table indefinitely. And remember, Mrs. Smith, in a lawsuit, every aspect of your life will be scrutinized. Your relationships, your finances, your fitness as a mother. These things can be uncomfortable for a person in your position." The threat was clear, even if disguised in polite language. Mr. Wallace left a business card on the table and departed, leaving Elena alone with her racing thoughts. That night at home, Elena told Lily about the lawyer's visit. The girl listened in silence, with the same attentiveness she gave to her lessons at school. When her mother finished speaking, Lily asked a question that caught Elena off guard. "Do you think Mr. Hank would be upset if we took the money?" The question was simple, but it went straight to the heart of the matter. Elena thought about the old man she had known only superficially, but who had seen her daughter every day for months, a man who had spent decades searching for a way to honor the memory of someone who had saved him. "I think he would be sad," she admitted. "He wanted to give us a better life, not just money." "Then we can't accept it," Lily said with the conviction of someone who had made an important decision. "But Lily," Elena began, $50,000 is a lot of money. It would be enough to—" "Mr. Hank told me I was part of his platoon," Lily interrupted. "Soldiers don't abandon their platoon no matter what." Her daughter's precocious wisdom touched Elena deeply. She hugged Lily and made a decision that would change the course of their lives. "Then we'll fight," she said. The next day, Elena went to see Mrs. Davis at the hospital to tell her of their decision. The head nurse listened attentively, and then did something unexpected. She smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that," she said. "Why?" Elena asked. "Because Mr. Peterson gave me one more thing to deliver," Mrs. Davis replied. "But only if you decided to fight for the will." She opened the safe behind her desk and took out a small metal key. "This key opens a safe deposit box at the Chase Bank on Steinway Street," she explained. "Mr. Peterson rented it 6 months ago and left specific instructions. It was only to be opened if his inheritance was contested." Elena and Lily looked at each other with curiosity. What else had Hank planned? "I can go with you," Mrs. Davis offered. "I have a power of attorney signed by Mr. Peterson, authorizing me to accompany the opening of the box." On Saturday morning, the three of them, a head nurse, a custodian, and a 10-year-old girl, arrived at the Chase Bank on Steinway Street. The manager, Mr. Evans, received them with the respectful efficiency he reserved for all clients, regardless of their appearance or social standing. The safe deposit box was in the bank's vault, a maximum security area. When the key was inserted into the lock, along with the bank's key, a metal compartment slid open, revealing its carefully organized contents. There was an old wooden box, some documents in sealed envelopes, and a small digital camcorder that seemed too modern for someone Hank's age. "Did he know how to use one of these?" Lily asked, pointing to the camcorder. "Mr. Peterson was much more modern than he let on," Mrs. Davis smiled. "He asked me for help learning how to use this a few months ago. They took everything to a private room the bank provided." Mrs. Davis turned on the camcorder and connected it to a small portable TV. The screen lit up, showing Hank sitting on his bed in room 214, looking directly at the camera. "If anyone is watching this recording," Hank's voice echoed in the silent room, "it's because my son is trying to contest my will. I'm recording this on April 15th, exactly 3 weeks before I die." The three of them exchanged glances. How did Hank know when he would die? "I'm not a psychic," Hank continued on the recording, as if he had read their minds. "But I know my heart is failing and I don't have much time. The doctors gave me a month, maybe 2. I chose not to tell anyone, especially not Lily." Lily's eyes filled with tears. Hank knew he was dying when she brought him cookies every day. "I want to make it clear," Hank continued, "that I am in perfect mental condition. Dr. Miller can confirm this, as can the hospital psychologist Dr. Evans, who evaluated me last week. I have copies of all the medical reports in this box." The recording paused for a moment as Hank adjusted his position in bed. "Richard," he said, looking directly into the camera, "if you are contesting my will, it's because you've become exactly the man I feared you would. Greedy, without compassion, unable to see value in people who can't give you something in return." Hank's words were harsh, but spoken with more sadness than anger. "During the last 2 months of my life, only 2 people treated me like a human being," he continued. "A custodian who always greeted me politely when she cleaned my room, and a 10-year-old girl who came up a floor every day to bring me homemade cookies." Hank paused the recording and picked up something just out of the camera's frame. "This medal," he said, showing the object to the camera, "was given to me by the United States Army after the Vietnam War. I received it because a Brazilian soldier saved my life during a bombing in Saigon." Elena's heart raced. The Vietnam War. Not the war Hank had told Lily about. "John Michael Smith carried me for 2 miles through enemy territory to get medical help," Hank continued. "He was hit by shrapnel along the way and died in my arms before we could reach the field hospital." The recording showed Hank holding the medal with hands that trembled with emotion. "I spent 50 years looking for his family," he said. "I wanted to return his dog tags, tell them how he died a hero, honor his memory somehow, but I could never find any relatives in Brazil." Hank looked directly at the camera again. "Until a 10-year-old girl showed up at my door with oatmeal cookies and the same last name as the man who saved me. The same observant eyes, the same natural kindness. I knew immediately that fate had given me one last chance to repay the debt I owed to the Smith family." The recording showed Hank pulling a folder of documents from under his pillow. "In this folder are photos of John, copies of his dog tags, military reports about the incident that led to his death, and the correspondence I had with the Brazilian army trying to locate his family," he explained. "There is also a journal I kept during my last 6 months, documenting every one of Lily's visits, every conversation we had, every cookie she brought me." Hank held the folder to his chest. "If Richard is contesting my will, he'll argue that these people took advantage of a confused old man. But I have never been more lucid in my life. I found the family I had been searching for half a century, and I can finally repay the debt I owe to the man who gave me a second chance at life." The recording paused as Hank took a sip of water. "Lily," he said, his tone softening, "if you're watching this, I want you to know that our cookies were the best part of my last few months. You gave me more than food. You gave me companionship, kindness, and the chance to feel useful again." Lily was crying now, but they were tears of gratitude. "And to you, Elena," Hank continued, "I want you to know that your daughter is extraordinary. She has the same courage and compassion as the man who saved me. Take good care of her, because people like her are rare in this world." The recording was coming to an end. "Richard," Hank said, speaking directly to his son again, "there is still time for you to do the right thing. There is still time to honor your father's memory instead of just coveting his assets. But if you choose to fight my will, know that it will only prove that I was right about who you've become." The screen went blank. Mrs. Davis turned off the equipment, and silence filled the small room at the bank. It was Lily who broke the silence. "He was really looking for my family for 50 years, she asked. Elena opened the folder of documents Hank had shown in the recording. There was a faded photo of a young soldier in a military uniform. He was unmistakably a Smith, the same eyes, the same facial structure she recognized in her own father. "My God," she murmured, "it's my grandfather. I recognize his features. My dad always said his father died in a war, but he never knew which one." There were also copies of letters Hank had sent to various Brazilian military agencies over the years, always asking about a soldier named John Michael Smith. Some letters had replies, others did not. All of them showed the persistence of a man trying to find a family that didn't even know it was being sought. "Now I understand why he was so specific in the will," Mrs. Davis said. "He knew Richard would contest it, and he wanted to make sure you had all the evidence you needed to prove his intentions were legitimate." They copied all the documents and put the originals back in the safe deposit box. When they left the bank, Elena felt different. Not just because she had discovered more about her family's history, but because she finally understood the magnitude of what Hank had done. He hadn't left them an inheritance simply out of gratitude for the cookies. He had completed a 50-year mission to find a way to honor the memory of the man who had saved him. On Monday, Mr. Wallace called Eleanor at the hospital. "Have you made a decision about our offer?" he asked. "Yes," Eleanor replied in a firm voice. "We're not accepting the settlement." There was a silence on the other end of the line. "Are you sure?" the lawyer asked. "Because my client is prepared to take this all the way." "So are we," Eleanor replied and hung up the phone. She didn't know yet how she would afford a lawyer or how she would face the pressures to come. But she knew she had something Richard didn't, the certainty that she was fighting for something bigger than money. She was fighting for the memory of a great-grandfather who had died a hero, for the friendship between a little girl and a lonely old man, and for the last wish of a man who had spent half a century trying to do the right thing. And for the first time since it all began, Elena felt truly ready for the fight ahead. 3 weeks after the discovery at the bank, Elena received a court summons at home. The official envelope from the Queens County Surrogates Court arrived on a rainy June morning, delivered by a process server who checked her ID with the gravity of someone handing over life-changing documents. Richard had made good on his threat. The challenge to the will was officially filed, and Elena had only 15 days to hire a lawyer and present her defense. She looked at the document, filled with legal terms she could barely understand, and felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. It was Mrs. Davis, who suggested the name of Mr. David Cohen, a lawyer specializing in estate law, who had previously handled contested wills. When Elena called his office, she honestly explained her financial situation. She had no way to pay the fees of an experienced attorney. To her surprise, Mr. Cohen agreed to see her for an initial free consultation. He was a man in his 60s, with grey hair and a neatly trimmed beard that gave him a fatherly air. His office was in a modest building in Forest Hills, far from the prestigious addresses where lawyers like Mr. Wallace worked. "Mrs. Smith," Mr. Cohen said after hearing the whole story, "this case has all the elements of a dramatic TV movie. A lonely old man, a kind-hearted child, an unexpected inheritance, a historical link between the families. If it were fiction, people would say it was unbelievable." "But it's not fiction," Elena replied. "All of this really happened." "I know," Mr. Cohen smiled, "and that's exactly why I'll take your case. But I can't afford to pay." "We'll work on contingency," he interrupted. "If we win the case, you pay me a percentage of the inheritance. If we lose, you owe me nothing. It's a risk I'm willing to take." Elena felt an immense sense of relief. She finally had someone with legal expertise on her side. In the weeks that followed, Mr. Cohen dove into the case with the dedication of a detective. He analyzed every document, every photo, every note in Hank's journal. He spoke at length with Mrs. Davis, who provided detailed reports on Hank's behavior, during his final months at the hospital, he also sought out other employees who could testify to the old man's mental clarity. Dr. Miller, Hank's attending physician, confirmed that the patient was in full command of his mental faculties until his last day. The psychologist, Dr. Evans, provided copies of the evaluations she had conducted at Hank's request. All the reports pointed to the same conclusion. Henry Peterson was mentally and emotionally competent to make decisions about his estate. During this preparation period, Richard intensified his intimidation tactics, not directly, but through Mr. Wallace, who made frequent calls to Elena at the hospital, always polite, always cordial, but always reminding her that there was still time to accept the settlement and avoid the public embarrassment of a trial. "You will have to testify in court," Mr. Wallace said in one of these calls. "Your daughter, too, a 10-year-old girl being questioned by experienced attorneys about her relationship with an elderly man. That can be traumatic for a child." His words had the desired effect. Eleanor was genuinely worried about the impact all of this could have on Lily. The girl had already gone through the grief of losing Hank, and now she would have to relive their entire friendship in front of strangers who would question her motives. But when Elena shared her concerns with Mr. Cohen, he reassured her. "Lily is our most important witness," he explained. "No judge will be able to listen to her testimony without being moved. Children don't lie about feelings. She will tell it exactly as it happened, and that will be more convincing than any legal argument." The trial was scheduled for a Tuesday at the end of July, in the Queens County Surrogates Court. Elena had never been in a courtroom before, and when she arrived with Lily and Mr. Cohen, she felt small amidst the pomp and formality of the environment. The room was large, with dark wood benches reminiscent of church, pews and a solemn air that made people automatically speak in whispers. The judge, Judge Robert Davis, was a middle-aged man with a serious but not intimidating expression. Richard was sitting at the petitioner's table next to Mr. Wallace and two other lawyers Elena didn't recognize. He wore an impeccable navy blue suit and avoided looking in her direction. There was something in his posture that suggested discomfort, as if he would rather be anywhere else. Mr. Cohen had prepared Elena and Lily for what to expect. They knew Richard's lawyer would try to insinuate that there had been manipulation, that Eleanor had used her daughter to influence a vulnerable old man. They knew they would be asked personal questions about their lives, their finances, their motivations. The trial began with Mr. Wallace presenting the arguments for the challenge. He spoke of the unusual situation of an elderly man leaving his inheritance to people he barely knew, of the emotional vulnerability of hospitalized patients, of the risk of undue influence exerted by hospital employees and their families. "Your Honor," Mr. Wallace said, addressing the judge, "we are faced with a classic case of exploitation of a vulnerable senior. The petitioner does not question the affection that may have existed between his father and the minor Lily, but affection does not justify an inheritance of millions of dollars to people who had no legal or familial ties to the deceased." When it was Mr. Cohen's turn to present the defense, he began in an unexpected way. Instead of legal arguments, he told a story. "Your Honor," he said, 50 years ago, during the Vietnam War, a young Brazilian soldier saved the life of a wounded American. The soldier died during the rescue, but the American survived and spent the rest of his life searching for the family of the man who had saved him." Mr. Cohen paused and looked directly at Richard. "This case is not about money. It's about gratitude, honor, and the completion of a mission that lasted half a century. Mr. Henry Peterson did not leave an inheritance to strangers. He paid a debt to the family of the man who gave him a second chance at life." The first witness called was Mrs. Davis. She described in detail Hank's routine at the hospital, his mental clarity, his conversations about Lily, and the plans he had made for his inheritance. She also presented the court with all the documentation Hank had prepared, including the psychological evaluations and medical reports. Dr. Miller testified about Hank's mental condition, confirming that the patient was fully capable of making important decisions until his final days. The psychologist Dr. Evans presented her evaluations, showing that Hank had requested the consultations specifically to ensure his testamentary decisions could not be questioned. When it was time for Mr. Cohen to play the recording Hank had left in the safe deposit box, the silence in the courtroom was absolute. Everyone listened to the old man's voice explaining his motivations, telling the story of John Michael Smith, describing his 50-year search and his joy at finding Lily. Richard listened to his father's voice with an expression that gradually changed from irritation to surprise, and then to something that looked like remorse. He had never known this side of Henry Peterson. To him, his father had always been a closed-off, hard-to-please man, stingy with displays of affection. But on the recording, Hank spoke with a passion and sensitivity that Richard never knew existed. When the recording ended, Mr. Wallace tried to question its validity, arguing that a man in fair terminal state might not be in full psychological condition. But the medical reports were categorical. Hank was mentally and emotionally stable when he made the recording. Finally, the moment everyone was waiting for arrived. Lily's testimony. Mr. Cohen had coached the girl on how to answer questions clearly and honestly without being intimidated by the formal setting. When she took the witness stand, everyone in the room could see a 10-year-old girl wearing her best dress, her hair carefully arranged by her mother, but maintaining the dignified posture that had impressed Hank from their first meeting. "Lily," Mr. Cohen began gently, "can you tell us how you met Mr. Peterson?" "I was exploring the hospital and I saw him alone in his room," Lily answered in a clear voice. "He looked sad." "And why did you decide to go back the next day?" "Because nobody should be alone when they're sad," she said with the simplicity of an absolute truth. The answer caused a murmur in the room. It was impossible not to be touched by her sincerity. Mr. Cohen continued asking questions about her routine of visits, about the cookies, about the conversations she had with Hank. Lily answered everything honestly, describing how their friendship had blossomed, how Hank had slowly become less grumpy and more approachable. "Did your mother know about these visits?" Mr. Cohen asked. "Not at first," Lily admitted. "But then I told her, and she said it was okay as long as I didn't bother anyone." "Did Mr. Peterson ever ask for anything in return for the cookies?" "No," Lily replied. "He always complained that the cookies were dry or too sweet, but he ate all of them. And sometimes he told me stories." "What kind of stories?" "About baseball, about when he was young, about the war his grandfather fought in." Lily didn't know she was referring to the distorted memories Hank had shared, adapting his own experience in Vietnam into a version more palatable for a child. When it was Mr. Wallace's turn to question Lily, he tried to maintain a gentle tone, but his questions had a clear intent, to insinuate that there was something inappropriate about the friendship between a child and an old man. "Lily," he began, "did your mother ever suggest that you take cookies to Mr. Peterson?" "No," Lily answered. "It was my idea." "Did you know that Mr. Peterson was rich?" "I didn't know," she said honestly, "and it didn't matter." "Why didn't it matter?" "Because I liked him," Lily replied. "Rich people can be sad, too." The answer caught Mr. Wallace off guard. He had expected a more elaborate response, one he could deconstruct. But Lily's simple logic was irrefutable. "Did Mr. Peterson ever promise you anything?" "He promised he would eat all the cookies, even when he complained they were bad," Lily said, and a few people in the room chuckled quietly. "Anything else?" "He said I was part of his platoon," she answered, "and that soldiers take care of each other." Mr. Wallace tried a few more questions, but it was clear that Lily was being completely honest. Her answers contained no contradictions or hesitations that would suggest manipulation or prior coaching. When Lily's questioning was over, she stepped down from the stand and returned to her seat next to her mother. Elena hugged her with pride. The girl had done better than any adult could have. It was then that something unexpected happened. Richard asked to speak with his lawyers privately. They huddled in a corner of the room for a few minutes, having a whispered but visibly tense conversation. When they returned, Mr. Wallace addressed the judge with an expression that mixed frustration and resignation. "Your Honor," he said, "my client would like to make a statement." The judge allowed it, and Richard stood up. He looked at Elena and Lily for the first time since the trial had begun, and his expression was no longer one of antagonism. "Your Honor," Richard began in a hesitant voice, "during this trial, I have heard things about my father that I never knew. I heard about his 50-year search, about his gratitude to a soldier who saved him, about how he found in the girl Lily a light during his final months of life. He paused and looked directly at Lily. I heard about a genuine friendship based on kindness and not self-interest. I heard about a child who saw a lonely old man and decided to do something to help him without expecting anything in return. Richard took a deep breath before continuing. I also realized something about myself during this process. My father was right. I have become the kind of man who sees value in people only for what they can give me. And when someone who could give me nothing received his affection, my first reaction was to try to take it away from her. The silence in the room was absolute. No one had expected this turn of events. Therefore, Richard continued, I would like to withdraw the challenge to the will. My father knew exactly what he was doing when he left his assets to Elena and Lily. He was paying a debt he had carried for 50 years and honoring a friendship that brought joy to his final days. Mr. Wallace tried to intervene, whispering something in Richard's ear, but he shook his head. Furthermore, Richard said, I would like to publicly apologize to Mrs. Smith and Lily for the months of stress and uncertainty I have caused. You did not deserve that. The judge, visibly surprised by the turn of events, asked if Richard was sure of his decision. I am, Your Honor, Richard replied. I want my father's will to be executed exactly as he intended. With the withdrawal of the challenge, the case was closed. Hank's will was deemed valid, and Elena and Lily officially became the heirs to a fortune that would completely change their lives. When they left the courthouse, Mr. Cohen was beaming. In 20 years of practicing law, he said, I have never seen a case like this. I have never seen someone change their mind so completely during a trial. Why do you think he changed his mind? Elena asked. Because he heard the truth, Mr. Cohen replied. Not the version filtered by lawyers and financial interests, but the raw, emotional truth. And he realized he was fighting against something beautiful in favor of something petty. That night at home, Lily asked a question that surprised Eleanor. Mum, do you think Mr. Hank is happy now? Why, honey? Because he got to pay the debt he owed my great-grandfather, Lily said, and because his son finally understood that friendship is worth more than money. Elena hugged her daughter, marveling at the wisdom of a 10-year-old girl who had perfectly understood the profound meaning of everything that had happened. Outside, the rain that had started in the morning finally stopped, and the afternoon sun illuminated the windows of their small apartment. It was as if even the weather was celebrating the end of a long and difficult journey, one that had ended in the most just way possible. And somewhere, Eleanor imagined, an old soldier named John Michael Smith could finally rest in peace, knowing that the family he had left behind was being cared for by the man whose life he had saved so long ago. 6 months after the trial, on a sunny January morning the following year, Elena woke up in her new house and still found it hard to believe it was all real. The house was in Park Slope, Brooklyn, on a quiet, tree-lined street, a world away from the small apartment where they had lived for so many years. It had 3 bedrooms, a spacious living room, a modern kitchen, and a small backyard where Lily had planted a cherry tree. The house had been a final surprise from Hank. Among the estate documents, Mr. Cohen had discovered that the old man had purchased the property 8 months before he died, specifically for Eleanor and Lily. There was even a letter attached to the deed, explaining that he had chosen that house because it was near a good public school and a hospital where Elena could work if she wanted to stay in the healthcare field. But Elena had made a different decision. With the financial security the inheritance provided, she decided to pursue an old dream, going back to school. She was in her 2nd semester of a teaching degree at a private college and had discovered a passion for education she never knew she had. On mornings when she didn't have class, she volunteered at St. Vincent's Hospital, helping hospitalized children with educational activities. Lily had adapted perfectly to her new school, St. Anne's, where she was in the 5th grade. It was a quality private school, but Eleanor had been careful to choose an institution that valued a humanistic education over social status. Lily remained the same observant and kind girl she had always been, but now she had access to resources Elena could never have imagined offering. piano lessons, swimming, and a personal library in her room filled with books she devoured voraciously. That January morning, the two were preparing for a special ceremony at St. Vincent's Hospital. After months of renovations, the old room 214 had been transformed into a library for patients and staff, as per Hank's wishes expressed in his will. The inauguration was that day, and both Elena and Lily had been invited to give the opening remarks. On the way to the hospital, Lily carried a special basket she had prepared the night before. Inside were oatmeal raisin cookies, the original recipe she had brought to Hank on the first day of their friendship. She had decided that from that day forward, on the first Saturday of every month, she would bring homemade cookies to patients who were alone in the hospital. "Mom," Lily said during the drive, "do you think Mr. Hank can see the library from where he is now?" It was a question Elena had learned to answer with honesty, but also with hope. "I don't know, honey," she said, "but I know that if he could see it, he would be very proud of how you've continued to care for people who need kindness." The library inauguration was a small but emotional event. Mrs. Davis, who had been promoted to Director of Nursing, gave a speech about the importance of humanizing hospital care. Dr. Miller spoke about how Hank had been an example that it's never too late to make a difference in someone's life. When it was Lily's turn to speak, she stepped up to the small makeshift stage in the hallway in front of the old door to room 214 and spoke with the same naturalness she had shown in court. "Mr. Hank always said that stories were important," she began. "He told me stories about baseball, about war, about brave people who do hard things because they're the right things to do. Now this library will have stories for everyone who needs one." She paused and looked at the plaque on the door, which read, "The Henry and John Library, in memory of a true friendship. But the most beautiful story Mr. Hank taught me," she continued, "is that small gestures can change someone's life forever. A cookie, a visit, a conversation. Sometimes that's all a person needs to remember they're not alone." When Lily finished speaking, there wasn't a person in the audience who wasn't moved. Even some of the sterner nurses were discreetly wiping their eyes. After the ceremony, Eleanor and Lily were invited to lunch at Richard's house. It was something that had become a routine in recent months, regular get-togethers between the two families that life had brought together in such an unlikely way. Richard lived in an elegant brownstone on the Upper West Side and had shown himself to be a completely different person from the one Eleanor had met during the legal proceedings. The experience in court had been transformative for him. He had started therapy to deal with relationship issues he had carried since childhood and had reconnected with values he had lost during years focused solely on professional success. "How was the inauguration?" he asked when they arrived. "Beautiful," Lily replied. "There's a special armchair near the window where Mr. Hank liked to sit." Richard smiled. Recent months, he had heard hundreds of stories about his father from Lily, and each one revealed a side of Henry Peterson he had never known. It was both painful and comforting to discover that the man he had judged to be cold and distant actually had an immense capacity for affection. "I brought something for you," Richard said, handing them a carefully wrapped package. Inside were two antique silver frames. One held the photo of the soldier, John Michael Smith, that had been stored for so long among Hank's documents. The other had a more recent photo, Hank and Lily together in room 214, taken by a nurse during one of her last visits. Neither of them had known they were being photographed. Hank was smiling as he watched Lily read a storybook aloud to him. "I found these photos among his personal belongings," Richard explained. "I think they belong to you more than to me." Elena held the frames carefully, touched by the kindness of the gesture. "There's one more thing," Richard said, looking slightly nervous. "I want to propose something to you." He explained that he had decided to create a foundation in his father's memory, focused on humanizing hospital environments and supporting vulnerable families. He wanted to invite Elena to be the executive director of the foundation when she finished college, and Lily to be the youth ambassador, visiting hospitals and talking with hospitalized children. "You don't have to answer now," he said, "but I thought it would be a way to continue the work you already do so naturally." It was a generous and meaningful proposal, one that would allow them to transform their personal experience into a larger mission to help other families. After lunch, Eleanor and Lily returned home. It was Sunday, and they had developed a special routine for weekends. They would sit in the backyard, Elena with her education textbooks and Lily with whatever story she was currently reading, and spend the afternoon together in a comfortable silence, much like the one they had shared back in the hospital supply closet. But now there was a fundamental difference. They were no longer hiding. Eleanor was no longer the invisible employee who cleaned hallways without being noticed. She had a voice, a presence, a future she was building herself. And Lily no longer had to hide in a cabinet among cleaning supplies. She had her own room, a desk for studying, and the freedom to explore the world through the books and experiences that were now within her reach. That afternoon, while Elena was studying a chapter on child development, Lily did something that had become a ritual. She opened the small wooden box where she kept her most important treasures. Inside were the bronze medal Hank had given her, a few cookies she had saved from the last batch she'd made with her mother, the journal where she wrote her own reflections on the stories she read, and a letter she had written to Hank but never delivered. The letter had been written 2 weeks before he died, when Lily had noticed he seemed more frail and tired than usual. In the letter, she had tried to put into words what their friendship meant to her. "Dear Mr. Hank," she had written in the careful handwriting of a 10-year-old, "thank you for letting me be part of your platoon. Thank you for eating all my cookies even when you complained they were bad. Thank you for teaching me that lonely people are less lonely when someone cares about them. You will always be my special friend, even when you're gone." Lily had never delivered the letter because she didn't know how to talk about death with someone who was dying. But now, months later, she understood that Hank had sensed all of that without needing it to be said in words. "Mom," she said, interrupting Elena's studies, "can I ask you a question?" "Of course, honey." "Do you think when we do something good for someone, it gets saved somewhere forever?" Elena closed her book and looked at her daughter attentively. "Why are you asking that?" "Because I was thinking about Mr. Hank and my great-grandfather, and you taking care of everyone at the hospital," Lily explained. "And I think maybe the good things we do don't just disappear. They stay in the world and make other good things happen." It was a reflection too profound for a 10-year-old, but Elena had learned not to be surprised by her daughter's precocious wisdom. "I think you're right," she replied. "Your great-grandfather saved Mr. Hank, and 50 years later, that resulted in a beautiful friendship between you and him. And now that friendship is turning into a library, a foundation, and other ways to help people. Like a chain," Lily said. "Every good person we meet teaches us to be good too." Eleanor nodded, amazed at her daughter's ability to find deep meaning in experiences that many adults would struggle to comprehend. That evening after dinner, they watched a movie together on the living room sofa. It was a simple luxury that still surprised them, having the time and space for leisurely moments without pressing financial worries. When the movie ended and they were getting ready for bed, Lily asked one more question that caught Elena off guard. "Mom, do you think our story will end up being important to other people?" "What do you mean, honey? Like, do you think one day someone will tell our story to other kids and other mums to show that good things can happen even when life is hard?" Eleanor thought about the question for a moment. In just a few months, their lives had been completely transformed. She had gone from an invisible custodian to a future educator with a mission. Lily had gone from a girl hiding in a supply closet to a young woman with all the opportunities in the world ahead of her. And it had all started with oatmeal raisin cookies offered out of pure kindness to a lonely old man. "You know what, Lily?" she answered. "I think our story is already important. Every time you take cookies to the patients at the hospital, every time I help a child struggling in school, every time Richard does something kind in his father's memory, our story keeps happening. And every time someone decides to be kind to a lonely person," Lily added, "our story happens again." It was true. The story that had begun with a curious girl and a grumpy old man had turned into something much bigger than any of them could have imagined. It had become an example of how small acts of kindness can create ripples that spread far beyond the people directly involved. 2 years after that conversation, Eleanor graduated with honors and officially took over as director of the Henry and John Foundation. The foundation had already benefited more than 15 hospitals in New York City, creating reading spaces, visitation programs for lonely patients, and humanization training for staff. Lily, now 12, had become known in the city's medical circles as the Cookie Girl. She visited hospitals regularly, not just bringing homemade treats, but also reading stories to hospitalized children and talking with elderly people who didn't receive visitors. She had been interviewed by newspapers and television programs, but always maintained the humility and naturalness that had won over Hank from their first meeting. At home, the two had created a special tradition. On the 15th of every month, the date Hank had passed away, they would bake cookies together and sit in the garden to talk about the foundation's projects, the people they had met, and their plans for the future. It was a way to honor his memory and to keep alive the most important lesson he had taught them, that true wealth is not in what we accumulate, but in what we share. Richard had become a constant partner in the foundation's work, and to everyone's surprise, especially his own, had discovered a calling for social work. He donated not only financial resources, but also his personal time and energy, and had developed a caring relationship with Lily that vaguely resembled the one Hank had had with her. On one of those afternoons on the 15th, as they prepared a new batch of cookies, Lily made an observation that perfectly summed up everything they had learned on their extraordinary journey. "You know, Mum," she said as she mixed the dough, "I don't think Mr. Hank left us an inheritance. He left us a mission." "What mission?" Elena asked. "To show the world that everyone matters," Lily replied, "that no person is too small to make a difference, and no person is too old to need kindness, that sometimes the most important thing we can give someone is just our attention." Elena hugged her daughter, feeling an immense gratitude for everything they had lived through and for everything they would still experience. They had started this story as two practically invisible people, a custodian and a girl hidden in a closet, but they had discovered that when people connect through genuine kindness, there is no limit to the transformations that can occur. And so on a sunny afternoon on another 15th, as the aroma of oatmeal raisin cookies filled the kitchen of their Park Slope home, Elena and Lily continued to write a story that had begun with a simple gesture and had transformed into a lesson on the transformative power of true friendship, because in the end, they had learned that real heroes aren't found on medals hanging on a wall or in monuments erected in town squares. They are found in quiet actions, in daily choices, in the courageous act of seeing someone everyone else ignores and deciding that person matters. And this girl saw. And through her eyes, a family found its second chance at happiness. A 50-year-old debt was finally paid, and the world gained one more example that small gestures can lead to great transformations.